Okay, so I was saying I was actually really excited to be hearing Brother PJ's sharing today. In fact, I got distracted for a bit in my meditation just now because I was thinking about introducing Brother PJ, and then I remember I hear Brother Zheng's instructions to like go back to the awareness of the breath, the breath, the breathing. So that's nice. Okay, so I'm gonna read out Brother PJ's bio. All right. To introduce him. All right, so let me read out Brother PJ's bio. All right, so to introduce our speaker today, Brother Pei Jing, Brother PJ. He currently works in service design and digital product management for Singapore Economic Development Board. And avid meditator, he is also an interaction and service design practitioner. He graduated from Rice University in Houston, Texas, and from the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design in 2019. He is inspired by his main teachers, Ajahn Brahm, Ajahn Brahmali, Venerable Analayo, and Ajahn Sujato. He aspires to be a nobody. His mentoring interest includes nurturing people. In his spare time, he likes to read, investigate, and practice early Buddhism, hang out with his wife, play with his cats, and work out. He's not very good with following instructions. His portfolio and personal page is at inquivision.com. So let me type that website into the chat. And if you want to get to know Brother PJ more, you can visit the website. Yep. Okay, so very quickly, just a short background about my relationship with Brother PJ. So I'm actually his mentee. So Brother PJ is my mentor for the SBM mentorship program. So that's why I was so excited. Actually, I was planning to have something on today, and then I made a change in my schedule so that I could be a host. Sister Amy reached out to me and he was like, "Oh, do you want to host this with Brother PJ?" I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I was really happy. And just a short sharing about my experience with Brother PJ. I enjoy a lot of his guided meditations. So during our mentoring sessions, I would sit with him and he would do a guided meditation. And he has given me a lot of good instructions for a lot of good guidance for meditation. So my meditation has improved a lot. So yeah, so if any of you want to learn more about meditation, you can also speak to Brother PJ about that. So today's topic is applying Buddhist principles at work. And that's why I wanted to tune in to today's sharing as well. Because after a few sessions of our mentoring sessions, I started to shift our focus to also some of the challenges I face at work as well. So I've been talking to Brother PJ a little bit about those areas and those challenges. And so I'm really hoping that Brother PJ's sharing could also help and support all of us today, right? So let us all pay attention. Let us all open our heart, and let us all benefit from this Dhamma sharing. So introducing applying Buddhist principles at work, Brother PJ. Thank you for the opportunity today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brother Waken, for the very kind introduction. And apologies to everybody that was late. I had to be kind to send my wife to her hairdresser appointment because there was no Grab available at the last minute. So I became a chauffeur for a while. Yeah, so that's what you have to do. Yeah, so maybe before I actually dive into the topic for today, I would maybe just give a bit of a background about my career, because I realized I spoke about my current role, which is as in the poster. But my career pathway it started off a bit of a zigzag. So I graduated from Houston and I came back to Singapore, and my very first job was actually on Jurong Island at this A-Star Research Institute. And I was not a researcher, but I was actually this, what they call an industry program development officer. So we liaise with the companies and the researchers. Did that for about 9 months. Then I switched to, this was 2006. So 2006, 2007. So I did that for about 9 months. Then I jumped ship from Jurong Island to Hong Kong Island, where I was working in the investment bank for about 1 year at UBS Investment Bank. And then the financial crisis hit So they then had to fire people. I kind of volunteered to be laid off. So then they were like, okay, sure. So I got laid off. And then I went to join a proprietary trading firm based in Singapore that then went bankrupt again because of the financial crisis. So after two stints of companies that had to lay off or or that they went bankrupt and had to fire people, I needed something that wouldn't go bankrupt. So I worked for the Singapore government, and Singapore government won't go bankrupt one now. So that has been the journey for the past 12 years. In the EDB, I started out actually in the energy and chemicals division for a couple of years. Was involved in an initiative where I was working closely with colleagues from the Singapore Civil Defence Force as well as the National Environment Agency. This was the Jurong Island version 2.0 initiative on the environment issues. Then I was posted to India for 3 years, and I came back to our strategic planning department, where I was then working closely with our chairman to actually shape our this initiative that's called Create, and there's now a new division called the New Ventures division. So they work closely with corporates to actually spin off new startups, like new ventures. And in that process, that was how I got exposed to designers, because they left the designers that I met in the course of this journey was in this initiative was they left a very deep impression that these were people who were very focused on actually what's the human impact, right, of whatever they did, which was a refreshing contrast from some of the other big name consultancies and investment bankers that I dealt with, right, who were like, okay, project done, let's move on, right? Whereas these designers were asking questions about, okay, I did this project, this is really great, there's a dollar impact, but actually, how did the human being benefit from this? And that inspired me to then go and study design, and that's why I did design. So you can see that my pathway is it's not even like a zigzag, it's like a all over the place now. Yeah, and I think that maybe I would actually say that my perspectives are quite heavily colored by my experience working in EDB, and maybe just to touch on the point about the strat planning stint, because that actually really opened my eyes. In the strategic planning division, I was actually working as a manager. But in EDB, the strategic planning team has a very unique position that we work very closely with our senior management. So we actually get to see, and we are often forced to actually have to work across the whole organization and across all levels. Yeah, so I think that my perspectives on things which I'm going to share are quite heavily colored by my own experience. So just to share that 2 cents. Yeah, I was to be honest, I haven't completely finished. So I wrote an outline of what I thought I was going to talk about on applying Buddhist principles to the workplace. And to be honest, to follow the best tradition of the Thai forest tradition, this isn't this isn't fully fleshed out. So I'm not fully sure 100% what I'm going to talk about. But I think that maybe before we dive into this, right, it might be useful to talk about what actually the Dhamma means, right? I think that when we think of the term Dhamma or Dhamma, we sometimes people think of Californian hippies and free love and all that stuff, right? But if you look actually at the sutta and the text, right, there are these terms that they frequently, talk in terms of opposites, right? There are pairs of words that come up all the time. And the opposite of Dhamma is actually Atha, which literally means a result. So in many ways, right, the Dhamma is actually really about understanding actually what are the root causes, what are the underlying principles. So for example, in Satipatthana, the fourth Satipatthana is actually that of a Dhamma, right? You actually Dhammanusati, right? And maybe the best way to actually interpret Dhamma, the word Dhamma into English, is to actually use the term principles. So the famous investor Ray Dalio has this book that he published called Principles. I read the whole thing. I was just like, okay, actually, this is very Dharma centric because it's the same thing. It's really about going back to like root principles. And my initial thought was to actually just talk about, okay, talking about applying like Buddhist principles to the workplace, then we can just talk about like Eightfold Path and just apply that directly. Then I realized that I'll be quite bored talking about that. Yeah, because I've already covered in some of my previous talks about the Eightfold Path. So instead of that, right, I think that maybe it's useful to take a first principles approach to applying the Dharma at work. And this isn't necessarily like MECE, like the acronym, the MECE, which means like mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, right? But I think that what I'm going to focus on instead are decisions and actions that anybody can actually like apply to your work. And these are my personal views colored by my own experience. So please feel free to look at this very differently. I think that when you look at the workplace, right, and yourself in the workplace, there are actually four decisions that need to happen. The very first one is actually about choosing a workplace, right? Then the second one, right, is about like how do you look at issues and matters, and what are the principles on like deciding on these issues and matters. The third one would be how do you treat people at the workplace, and the fourth one would be last but not least, right, and actually probably the most important is like how do you conduct yourself? How does one conduct oneself? And I think that the point about choosing a workplace is actually quite important, right? To quote from the Samyutta Nikaya SN 45.2, right? There's that famous sutta where the Buddha was told by Ananda that, oh, actually, good friends are like half the holy life. And then he kind of scolded, right? The Buddha basically scolded him and said that, no, it's the whole of the holy life. What is interesting is actually like to dive into the reason why did the Buddha say that the Sangha is actually the whole of the holy life. And if you read the text, right, there's actually this explanation where the Buddha actually said that when a bhikkhu or any Buddhist, right, has a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, which then culminates in seclusion and so on and so forth. In other words, right, and if you also apply the lens of anatta, right, non-self, if there truly is a self that is like, fully in control, doesn't change with anything, then actually the environment doesn't matter so much. But precisely because that there is this, that actually everybody, there's no real self within you, you are then heavily colored by the environment around you. And then choosing the workplace that you're at, right, becomes like super important, right? And if you think about a typical work week of like, you calculate like 7 times 24, you have 168 hours. A typical work week takes up anywhere from like 42 to, on the other extreme, 120 of those hours. So actually that's where most of your mind, right, will be at for most of your awake state, Yeah. And that actually shapes everything else. So I think as a Buddhist, practitioner, we need to actually be aware and to deliberately choose the right workplace, right, that actually then helps us to shape the conditions. So maybe I should take a step back and say that whatever I say, right, is really I have some implicit assumptions on like what are good outcomes. So you will not necessarily get super rich as a result by following what I say, right? Nor necessarily successful from a conventional sense in terms of like material well-being and stuff like that. But I think that what is a sure bet is that if you were to follow these principles that are based on the Dharma, you can probably sleep well at night and you probably will suffer a lot less than if you didn't do so. Yeah, so sidetrack, come back to the main topic on the workplace. So then, okay, workplace very important. I've elaborated on that. How then should you, what criteria should you actually use to choose a good workplace? And I think that quite importantly, is actually the team you're going to be working with, as well as actually the culture of the place, right? And how do you know whether it's good or bad, right? It's with reference actually to your own state of mind and your progress to the Eightfold Path. if you go to a workplace where you end up actually like having a lot more of the unwholesome states arising, or you're super frustrated with like everything, you're like constantly, or that you have this strong sense of like desire for all kinds of like nonsense, which was the case in like the bank that I was working in. I mean, one of the anecdotes I can share was what the reason why I decided to leave. One very strong reason was a chat with one of my bosses, right? And on our way to Taiwan for a work trip, she commented to me. She said that, PJ, I can never stay in a hotel less than 5 star, and I can never sit in any business class plane ticket less than the business class. And I was just like horrified. I was like, why? Why would you say something like this, right? And she said, because I'm just so used to it, right? And the salary of investment bankers pay, right, is so high that it has taken me 10 years in a well-paying government job, right, to reach my base salary as a first-year analyst in the investment bank, right? And that made me realize, and I was like, wow, actually, the world of like investment banking is it's not just samsara, it's like super samsara. Like it's more desire, like, and everyone would just like, they seem to actually pass that time at work to go like, okay, I just need to tolerate this, and I get all the salary and the pay, and then they just indulge. They just buy all kinds of like expensive things and so on and so forth. And that's when I realized that, okay, I see this and I realized that everybody was like deeply unhappy and also not very healthy because they're working like 120 hours per week. And I was like, okay, I'll do this for 1 year, but then I'll leave. Yeah. And I think that my state of mind during that 1 year also was not exactly the best. Strongly moved by all kinds of like desires. I was extremely bad tempered because I was also severely lacking sleep. Yeah, so I think that this state of mind, right, becomes a very important criteria as a Buddhist, practitioner, to decide like, how do you want to choose a workplace. And there's actually this sutta that elaborates this as well, right? The Majjhima Nikaya 17, right? It's called Jungle Tickets, and the Buddha actually talks about 4 situations for a monk. You can have a lot of like you can have a place where you have a lot of like requisites, right? But your meditation is not so good. Then you have got a lot of requisites, but your meditation is very good. And then the reverse, like, so you don't have a lot of like requisites, but your meditation is very good. Don't have a lot of requisites, and your meditation is not very good. The TLDR is that as long as your meditation is not good, right? Even if you have a lot of like abundant material things, the Buddha gave the recommendation that the monk should reflect that I didn't go forth from the lay life to homelessness for the sake of all these material things, right? And then the Buddha gave the advice that this monk should leave that place at that very time of night and day. They shouldn't stay there. They shouldn't even delay. They should just leave immediately. Right. That's how important that the Buddha actually places the focus on like the quality, like the impact on your mind. And you can extend this to actually any decision criteria in any realm, like when it comes to life, pretty much as a Buddhist practitioner. Yeah. So that is, I think that on like choosing a workplace, right? And I think that if you also maybe you don't meditate, then you're like, okay, how do I like gauge this, right? How do I gauge like the quality of my mind? I would say that there are 2 ways. One way is that you can actually like keep a diary, and then when you read your own diary entries, like, okay, this is very clear, right? The trend. The other way is to ask the people who live with you, right? They will be the surest gauge that are you becoming more of a pain in the ass, right? Which is a sign that your mind is going the wrong way, right? Or are you kinder, gentler, like, more compassionate and easier to live with? Yeah. So I think that's like a one one test for you. So I think that's actually the first criteria I mentioned of the 4 things about like choosing a workplace, right? The second one is actually about like how do you look at issues and matters, and then how do you then make a decision, right? I think that if you actually look at the framework of the 4 noble truths, what I think a lot of people don't realize is that it is basically a form of like in engineering what you call a root cause analysis, right? Where you first talk about like, okay, there's a symptom, right? What's the cause of the symptom? What happens when the cause is removed? Then how do you remove that cause, right? Yeah. So if you think about it, right, first noble truth, the symptom is that suffering exists, right? What's the cause of the symptom, right? Wanting or causing, right? Wanting or craving, right, causes that suffering. And what happens when you remove that cause? Then you have the validation that, okay, when I remove that wanting or craving, then actually there is that happiness, that pleasure, there's no suffering, right? Then how do you get there? Then there's the empirically proven solution of the Eightfold Path, right? And you can actually apply this to any problem, right, at work pretty much. But frequently, a lot of times, right, we have all these people that surface problems. But what a lot of people don't realize is that many problems at work, right, are actually really just symptoms. And if you dive deeper and go, okay, actually, what is really the cause of this? And you investigate further, right? You can then actually, identify, what really are the root causes. So, say for example, giving a hypothetical situation of like your company is not innovative enough. I'm just pronouncing it in as pretentious a way as possible, right? And using a made-up example is that, oh, actually, the symptom there is that we have no new products in the past like 5 years, right? Then you dive deeper and ask, okay, why is it that there's like no new products? What's the cause of this problem? And maybe you might discover that, oh, there's no product innovation team, or that, okay, there's a product innovation team, but actually nobody has got time. They're all like asked to do like all kinds of like other nonsense. Everyone's like super overworked, right? And then after you've had a few, probes and experiments, you realize, okay, actually this really is the root cause. Then you figure out, okay, what can we do, right, to actually address this particular root cause? Maybe after trying a few things, you realize that, okay, when we introduce a 4-day work week, now we have a lot of like new products, for example. Then you can go, okay, that's great. Then how do we like, how do we get there? How do we continue, with like this solution? Yeah. So I think that this, in practice, like the second, third, and fourth steps, right, will probably be like an iterative thing, because it's quite hard to say that you think about the ideal solution, then you just boom do that, right, and then you achieve that. It's in the same way that would be like saying that you read about the Four Noble Truths, you understand it, and then you can just somehow like miraculously be enlightened, right? That doesn't work that way, right? You need to actually like try, and within the Buddhist context, that trying is by doing the practice, like walking through the whole Eightfold Path, including meditation. Yeah. So I think that you can actually apply this as a framework to like pretty much everything that you do. I think that the other part of it, right, is actually about so we've spoken about a framework you can directly apply to any like problem you face at work, any issues or matters. Another point, right, that tends to be missed, right, is actually about the fact of actually when you're looking at it, right, how are you looking at the matter, right? What's your mental state, right? Your own mental state when you're looking at it, right? To quote this American journalist called Upton Sinclair, he had this famous quote, right, that it is very hard to make a man understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it, right? And there are all these biases that come into our play. And in the Buddhist context, I think that the key ones, right, that the Buddha talk about are things about like strong sensual desire, right, ill will, and also about what the other things are. Okay, let me try and like recall. Let me just like look through very quickly. Yeah, actually the five hindrances law. Yeah, ill will, sensory desire, ill will, restlessness and remorse, like, and what are the other few? I can't remember now. Sorry, I've had a very long week, so I'm like quite tired in person. Yeah. If I were to quote this particular sutta that the Buddha used to describe this, it was a Samyutta Nikaya sutta, where he gave a beautiful simile of a bowl of like water, right? And your mind is like this bowl of water, right? And you can only really see through a bowl of water when it's completely clear, right? But when you've got defilements, right, then he gave the analogy of like sensual desire is like adding in a dye, right, throwing in like some color, right, and then actually that affects and changes the color. So that actually affects your reflection. It affects like how you see the thing, right? Then if you have got ill will, a very great simile is that it is like boiling water, right? You're bubbling with like anger and irritation, right? And you literally cannot see through clearly because there are so many bubbles in it, right? Um, then if I were to elaborate further, the other example that he gave was like a sloth and torpor, right? And then he gave it's like the mind is like covered with like moss, right? It's like just so moldy and like, you know, and then you can't really like see very clearly. And then if it is actually restlessness and remorse, what was it? It was, yeah. It's as though that the water is stirred by the wind, right? Churning, swirling, and rippling. Then even if you look at it, you can see very clearly. And then with doubt, right, it's as though that the water's like very cloudy, very murky, and like that's like hidden in darkness. Right? So I thought that actually that this simile of the five hindrances is something that is and the state of your mind, right, is actually a very accurate thing to bring in and to factor in when you're looking at a problem. Yeah. So for example, right now, my mind is quite frankly very moldy and filled with like a lot of like weeds because I had a very long and intense week. So I'm actually quite tired at this point in time. Yeah. So I think that that's actually on this point about your state of mind and how do you look at it, right? Because without that clear seeing, without truly knowing the things, you don't really see the cause. You can't really like really understand like, you know, see things as they actually are. You can't really solve the matter. You can solve the superficial matters. You might not be able to, or the optics of it. You might not be able to solve the root causes. Yeah. Moving on to the third thing about like how to treat people at the workplace. I think there are multiple aspects to this, right? When you talk about like treating people, I think there is maybe to take a segue, right? And to sidetrack a little bit, when there are two aspects to like dealing with people. One is about your own personal like view, right? Related to the previous comment about the five hindrances, right? In addition to the five hindrances, there's also this element of like, actually, what are you paying attention to in the other person, right? And it is something that also applies to our own self. If we keep focusing on our own faults, that's actually what happens. That's what actually manifests. And this actually is in the 19th Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, MN 19, right? Where the Buddha actually said that whatever a monk pays attention to, that's actually what the mind will incline towards to. So if you pay attention to like, you know, ill will, desire, and all that stuff, that's actually what you're inclined towards to, right? I don't know if you ever had the experience before of being in an argument with people who they criticize you or other people of things that actually they themselves do, right? Which I've seen in like my with some of my ex-bosses are they're like, yeah, that person never ever replied that, you know, emails. It's like after a few months, I still haven't gotten a reply from that person. I'm just like, that sounds very familiar. Right. And then you've got people who are like, you know, quite lazy, complaining about laziness about other people and so on and so forth. Right. And it's that same phenomenon that's taking place where whatever they're paying attention to in themselves, that's actually what they're paying attention to other people also. But the important point here also is that there's also actually a feedback loop that results when you're interacting between people. So whatever you focus on in at the other person, right, is actually what they'll then show back to you, right? And it then becomes and in a culture like Singapore where we tend to complain a lot, for example, that is actually very dangerous, right? Because then you are directing your mind right to, and you're directing actually the energies and the attention of everybody towards like actually what is more negative. It's not to say that you should be like, you know, like Unikitty in the Lego movie, right? It's like, oh, stay positive, and then you like drown. That's not the intention, right? But it's more about like, okay, you look at things objectively. Yes, there are things that are lacking, but how would you want to choose to focus on actually, and how would you want to direct the attention, right? That actually becomes quite important because that actually sets the. It's like it's almost as though that you're setting a direction for a ship, no? Because then subsequently the things will actually move in that direction. Yeah. The other important book, just to sidetrack, right, is that I read this book called Cure, right? And it's a very interesting book written by a journalist for Nature magazine about the placebo effect, placebo and nocebo, right? And the thing about the placebo effect, right, is that to this day, the mechanisms of the placebo effect is actually not very well known. When we think of placebo, the layperson understanding when I read the book as a placebo effect means that it doesn't work long, right? But the very first chapter of the book, the author actually went in to talk about this particular study, right? And she went to interview the author of the paper, who was trying to explain that he was trying to get the editors of the journal that he's submitting the paper to understand that, okay, it's true that this drug was not better than the placebo, but what surprised him was how the placebo was so effective. So for example, right, if I give Amy, for example, like a thing that looks like a capsule, right? And it's medical grade, but I tell you actually upfront that this is not a drug, right? This is actually a fake drug, but taking this will actually, cure you from altitude sickness, for example, if you're going to Ladakh to visit there, for example. It's a very high percentage of people that actually, when they're given this context and scenario, when they take that fake pill, there's a very high percentage of people, something like 30 something percent of people, right, will actually not experience altitude sickness as a result of that, right? And when I read that book, and the whole book is, I mean, I'm just like summarizing, but the whole book is filled with all these empirical like evidence of like the placebo effect and taking place and how powerful it is. That then caused me to think about like human interactions, right, at a workplace. It becomes even more pertinent, like how are you choosing to, because everything you say, right, you're suggesting to somebody basically. If you're a manager, even more so, right? So then that becomes even more powerful. Like how is it then that you are choosing to look at the person, how you're choosing your words, right? And what are you then like seeding? Because everything you say is then either a placebo that helps them to enhance their performance, or a nocebo, right? It actually reduces their performance. Yeah. So this is something that I also personally experienced at the workplace where with my cat, not workplace, but with my own cat, in a personal experience, which I elaborated in a different talk, so I won't go down that detail. But I've noticed a very interesting phenomenon that at work, right, when I make a deliberate decision to focus on my colleagues' strengths, uh, invariably it ends up being a very positive experience for everybody. Because more often than not, what happens is that I decide, okay, I'm going to trust them and I will actually like give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And then by doing so, they would sometimes check in first, right? And then by giving like the accurate feedback, but also focusing and saying that, okay, yes, actually there's this thing that you did that's really, really good, and just going to reinforce and tell you that actually this is great, carry on doing this. They gain confidence. When they gain confidence, and they actually then end up like doing even better, right? So there's that virtuous cycle that kicks in as a result of that verbal placebo in that sense that you're giving to the individuals. So in contrast, when you start focusing on the negative, oh, why are you doing it in this way? Then the other person's like getting like even more insecure, and then they're actually not very certain. Oh, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? Then it becomes like a spiral downwards. Then they just becoming like, you know what? No matter what I say, this boss will always come like find fault with whatever I do, or just give up, right? So that's actually the downward spiral. So I think that the interactions that you have, right, choosing how you want to see that person and then choosing like what you want to say is actually quite important, and it's better to focus on like the positives. So yeah, I will also share a story from and I, in case you think that this is just only like something that works for as a manager downwards or amongst your peers, let me share a story actually of an actual thing that I had with a former boss, right? So I won't name this former boss because this is recorded. Yeah, but when I first worked with this former boss, right, my initial sense was like, okay, this boss is super anxious. And for quite a while, right, I was actually fault finding with this particular boss, to be perfectly candid about it. this particular boss, right, would ask a shitload of questions, and then the presentation notes would be like scribbled like all kinds of like things. I'm just like, wow, like this person's like very, very kanchiong. You know, and by temperament, I tend to be like very chill about things. Until one day, right, I was like complaining about this boss to my wife for the umpteenth time. And then my wife turned to me and said that, aren't you fault finding? And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And that caused me to realize that, okay, I've been looking at this particular boss, right, like this pure fault finding lens, right? And she's probably not feeling too great as a result of this. As a result of that, right, I actually deliberately took a whole week, right, or two, right, to then ask myself, actually, what aspect of her, right, is it something that I can truly respect? What are her strengths that I really, really like, admire? And it took me a while to land on this, but there were two things that struck me. One was actually that she's extremely humble, which I'll be talking about next as well. So even though she's very high ranking in the organization, she's not afraid to actually like just call the most junior person. If she hears that this person is an expert in or like knows about something better than she does, she just pick up the phone, ask that person, hey, do you have time? Can we have a chat? I really love to understand like this particular thing. Then she'll make the time to like actually like ask the person for materials, and she, because she's also like a little bit like on the anxious side, right? She would thoroughly prepare for things as well, right? That's the other thing that actually I really respected. Like you give her anything, she would just mug the whole thing. She would just like scribble. She would make sure she fully understands it. The rumor that I heard was that when she took over the electronics sector, she's not an electrical engineer by background, but when she took over the electronics sector in her younger days, she went to go and buy an entire textbook on electronics engineering, and she marked the whole book, actually, like a university level textbook. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, that's like super impressive, right? And that's something that I was like, these two things are things that I truly admire about her, right? I was like, wow, this is not what I am, right? This is not my strength. And this is like, truly what I really admire about her. And then I started asking myself, what are my strengths that can complement hers? So that actually allowed me to then figure out, okay, between the two of us, right, how could we best coordinate? So there were things that I realized that, okay, I need to help her with this because she's actually maybe not so strong at this, or like she's maybe a bit anxious about this. I can put it to her and let her choose and so on and so forth. Then other things that I know I'm not so strong on, I can actually ask her. I was like, can you please help me with this? Yeah. Then it became a much better partnership as a result of this one. And I think that as a boss, right, this idea of like humility, and as a Buddhist practitioner, this idea of humility is something that is actually demonstrated by the Buddha himself, something that not many people know about. But if you look at Samyutta Nikaya 2, right, there's like one particular sutta in the whole Samyutta, where it's the end of the rains retreat, and in the forest tradition, at least in the old, in the, not the forest tradition, but in the Patimokkha, at the end of the rains retreat, right, actually there's this ritual where all the monastics would do, where you would ask actually that, you ask the community, the Sangha, like, is there anything that I did by body, speech, and mind that, should be admonished, that you think that I should improve on, right? And in this particular sutta, the Buddha actually initiated it for himself. He actually asked the entire Sangha and said that, is there anything that I did this whole rains retreat that you think that, is worthy of admonishment, right? And I feel that when I read that, I was just like completely blown away. I was just like, wow, this is like the Buddha, I mean, clearly like the rest of the Sangha then, went to say that, you are the founder, you're the setter of this. Clearly, there's nothing that we find fault with you, and that you're fully enlightened. There's nothing to find fault with you. But the fact that he actually took that step is something that is actually very, very worthwhile. And the best bosses I've ever worked with in the workplace all have the element of humility. Like the best bosses I worked with, that lady that I spoke about, but other bosses that I had in my earlier days, I initially thought that was an EDP thing. Then now I've realized actually that it was just these two bosses, right? Where at the end of the one-on-ones that I had with them, they would actually stop and ask me and ask, do you have any advice, any feedback for me? Yeah. And I've come to adopt that as a practice, because I come to realize that, when you are a boss frequently there are a lot of blind spots. And the people who know your blind spots best are the people who are, working with you, both your teammates as well as the people who are reporting to you. Yeah, so I think that humility is actually extremely important. Yeah, I think that the other aspects of like Buddhist principles that are applicable would be right speech, right? So the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, which is like the discourse on how to avoid conflict, is extremely useful, right? It's not enough that what you say, right, is true and beneficial, right? And sometimes when in the heat of the moment, right, your mind is like filled with like ill will. You feel that you're justified, right? Like just now on the way, so I was sending my wife, and on the way back, driving back, there was a truck that just cut in front of my car in a very dangerous way. Like we almost like collided. And as I was driving past him, I was like thinking to myself that I'll be fully justified to like flip my middle finger at that person, right? But then it's completely not beneficial, right? So that's why I didn't do so. So I think that the criteria in the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, MN 139, for those who are interested, it's actually very useful. Right? That whatever you say, especially in a workplace, like what you say, right, should be actually true, and it should also be beneficial, right? Not just for yourself, but also like actually for the team, for the person, and so forth. And most importantly, I feel it's actually also about the right timing. Yeah. You say these three things, right? If it's true and beneficial, but it's not the right time, right? You should actually really pick the best time to do so. Yeah. And timing is very contextual, but broadly speaking, uh, I would say that's a bad time to like bring up any hard discussions, right, or difficult discussions before meals. Yeah, people tend to be hangry. It's a very real phenomenon. I am guilty of that. Yeah. So I think that the other aspects of like right speech, not lying, not being malicious, or like intentionally like manipulative and so forth. And also like harsh speech, right? Because of the placebo and nocebo effect I mentioned earlier. Yeah, and then yeah, I think those are some of the key ones. Yeah, I would also just add that in the sutta, there's actually also pretty good guidance on how to navigate. Okay, I wouldn't say like how to navigate office politics, but basically, um, you do have to actually be mindful of dangers, right? So like there's like this text, this sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 3.1, where the Buddha actually commented that there are four things that you shouldn't despise them because they're young, right? A prince, a snake, a flame, and a monk. Right. A monk is because of the fact that they are like very virtuous, right? And then if you offend them or do something, whatever you do to them, like comes back to you many, many times now, right? A flame because like a small flame or a young flame can easily become something that spreads very widely. A snake because it's poisonous. A prince because a prince when they become the king, right, then they are extremely powerful. And when I read this, right, I was like, wow, this is a very good description of like certain personas in the workplace, right? Yeah. And if you think about a monk or a virtuous one, just from a pure Dharma perspective, right? Doing things that wrong righteous people who are righteous, is probably a very dangerous thing to do, right? A flame, right? I think that the analogy to that, right, would be that to be careful of like people who would spread things, right? Yeah. Whatever you say, and you do have to like kind of like test and like figure out like who is actually this like small flame that if you feed them a bit of fuel, they'll suddenly just blow up and like just spread to everybody, right? Some of the gossip kings and queens. Then a snake, right, will be those that are they have a lot of like venom inside. I think that those people who are strongly envious, people who are easily jealous, people who can be quite manipulative. I think those are people you might want to be cautious of. Then the prince are all those people who are like the hypo people who are peers, right? If you piss them off, then later they become your boss, then you're going to have a pretty tough time, right? So in the government context, like a lot of scholars, for example, right, So if you are, for example, going to be working closely with like a son of a minister, it's probably not a good idea to tell to complain about that particular minister in front of the son, right? Yeah. So stuff like that. Yeah. So I think that's this whole point about like how to treat people all around, right? And I think coming back to this point about like how to conduct oneself, and this one actually is like advice that I would say straddles between both like how do you conduct oneself and how to treat the people all around. There's this lovely passage in the Metta Sutta, right, of like, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, not busy with duties and frugal in their ways, right? And I think that that is actually perfect guidance for like how to conduct oneself as a Buddhist practitioner in the workplace, right? And I remember speaking to a friend who's now a nun in Dhammasara. I asked her, the thing about her is that she's actually from a very privileged background, and she is now a nun. And when we met in 2018, when I visited her in the monastery, in the nunnery, I asked her like, "Oh, how is like a monastic life for you?" And she gave this beautiful reply. She said that it all depends on the personality, right? If you are the type who is like, I have to be the CEO, like giving the orders to people, then you're going to suffer in a monastery, right? Especially as a junior monastic. And I personally find that the best way to live life in a workplace that is a blameless way is to really just to cultivate that humbleness, that lack of conceit, that lack of like, oh, I am like this, right? And I am a boss in that sense, or whatever it is, right? And that no task is like too low below you. I mean, to quote a real example, there was like this corporate management offsite that my planning team was like organizing. And after that, right, what was really interesting was that a lot of my colleagues who were in the corporate management team, they just left their bottles all over the place, like plastic bottles, right? And the person who was going around picking up the bottles was our chairman. Yeah, he was literally going around like picking up the bottles, right? And I was so annoyed, right, at my other colleagues that I sent the email to everyone saying that, guys, please pick up after yourself. And then our chairman replied to the email saying that, so sorry, PJ, I tried to like set the example. I was like, no, it's not you. It's not you. Yeah. But I think that sent a signal to everybody, right? And I think that that's exactly like what leadership is really about. It's not about like, oh, nothing's like too low below me that I can actually like, do it, right? And set the example with that. It's a similar thing that you see with like the monastics that I mentioned as like teachers. Like Ajahn Brahm frequently does a lot of the things, and frequently he has to be prevented from doing so because he's like told that yeah, it's not safe and stuff like that. So for the longest time, he's now been banned apparently from like doing any like rooftop toweling work in the monastery because everyone's like, you have to take care of yourself. You're like a senior monk and blah 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 blah. Yeah. So after enough nagging, he has stopped doing that apparently. Yeah. I think that the other part about like how to conduct yourself, I would actually say it's really about like exercising like sense restraint. Yeah. So there is this Anguttara Nikaya fours, the book of fours, I think the 11 to 14 or something like that. There are all these like suttas that elaborate about like the six factor of the Eightfold Path, right? Sama Vayama. Basically, to exercise the restraints, right, and to exercise the restraint maintenance. I can't remember the details now. Sorry, I'm very, very tired. But basically exercising the right effort such that actually the wholesome mental states, right, both are that were not there actually become there. Those that are there actually that they grow and that they're maintained. Then the unwholesome mental states, right, actually that they diminish over time. Right. So I think that this conducting of like oneself, everything that you're doing at work, you can actually think about it like, okay, using the test of like your mental state, is this leading to like more wholesome mental states, or is it like not leading to like that, right? Is it leading to more unwholesome mental states like growing? Like, is there more ill will, more desire, or is it more kindness, compassion, and so forth? Yeah. And then also to be kind to yourself. So if, for example, that you're stuck in a workplace that's less than ideal, but you have to be there for reasons like that have nothing to do with the Dharma, but everything to do with, like, people that depend on you, right? Like a family and so forth, then that's fine. I mean, there's no uh, you're not staying in there, right, because that you want the money and the desire and so on and so forth, right? You're doing it for other people, right? And there's something like noble about that. But the first chance you get, right, to be able to switch workplace or career pathway, then you can do so. There's this story that Ajahn Brahm shared about Ajahn Chah one time, where this fisherman came to Ajahn Chah and asked for advice, saying that as a Buddhist, I'm a fisherman. That's is that okay? But I have to fish, right, in order to actually keep my family alive. So what should I do? And Ajahn Chah actually then taught this gentleman, this fisherman, all the stuff that he learned from being a forest monk. So the forest monks actually know all the herbal medicines and stuff like that. And over time, then this fisherman was able to build up enough experience to be the village doctor, and he was able to give up like fishing. So then he was able to actually like really lead a very like blameless like livelihood, as a result of that. And I think that that would actually be my advice for people who are stuck in a workplace, but you've got no choice because of like you have to keep up your support your family and so forth, right? That's perfectly fine. The Metta Sutta also applies to yourself, right? The loving kindness also applies to yourself, so you don't need to be too harsh on yourself for that. Yeah. Yeah, I will also just say about like the last point, right, on how to conduct oneself. There is this sutta that I came across quite recently. It's from the Satipatthana Samyutta, SN 47.4, and it's a beautiful sutta that's got both in Pali and in Chinese, and it's called a hawk, right? And in this story, right, this sutta, the Buddha gives the description of like a story of like this little quail, right? And this little quail, right, was caught by a hawk because it was like flying too far out. And the quail then started lamenting and said that, oh, I didn't know like my home ground. I went out of the place of like my father and like my mother. If I was sticking to the place of my father and my mother, then I wouldn't be in my situation right now. And the hawk was then very proud and said, what do you mean by that? And the quail said, if I was still in my, on the fields, right, in the low lying fields, then you wouldn't be able to catch me. And the hawk was very proud, and the hawk was like, okay, sure, I'll let you go. You go back to your fields. I'll show you that I can still catch you, right? So the quail then disappeared to the field, right? And the hawk started diving down to catch the quail. And at the last moment, right, the quail then ducked into like this earth bank, and the hawk crashed into the mount and then died on the spot. And the Buddha then used this as a simile, right, to tell the monks that stick to where you know, right? And as a monastic, where you know is actually not the space that's not where you the place that's not your family or your home ground is actually the world of the five senses. The place that's your home ground is actually the four satipatthanas, right? The contemplation of the body, feelings, mind, and also the dhammas, right? So the Buddha then gave the advice that you should stick to your home ground. And I would actually say that that's also very good advice for individuals in a workplace, right? You should try to stick to like actually what you're good at, right? The areas and the terrain where you're familiar with, in the sense that actually you know this, you know that you're good at it. And then if you are able to like really master that, right, then to actually focus on that one. But there's also an added element to this sutta that I thought was useful from a work context, right, which is that like the Buddha's advice isn't just applicable to the monks, right? It's also applicable to each of us as practitioners. That when you're in a workplace, you're actually in a context where you get exposed to a lot of things from the five senses, right? And that actually is not really our home territory as a Buddhist. Yeah. So to focus very much on the four satipatthanas, to focus on actually like the Dharma, actually that's actually what I would give as like a key advice. Yeah. I had this last point to say that it is it we are not monastics yet, and so that is going to be there's going to be a constant tension between like balancing between the needs and the wants and the desires of the five sense world versus that of the Dharma, and that's perfectly fine, right? I think the direction I would suggest would be to take inspiration from the fact that in the suttas there's so many of these lay persons that while still lay people, they were able to advance to a non-returner state, which is very, very high actually if you think about it. And yet they were able to still become like non-returners, right? So the path is actually open to all. It is really for us to walk it and to not give up. Yeah, that would be my final word. So with that, I've spoken for 45 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Brother PJ, for the wonderful sharing. Very inspiring. I love the closing remark, right? That the path is open to all, and that we can be inspired by that. We can take hope in that, right? And continue on the path. So that's very inspiring. Thank you so much, Brother PJ.